The scent of fresh lilies and old money hung thick in the air. The funeral home was packed. Executives in sharp suits, former colleagues whispering behind expensive handkerchiefs, and family members who hadn't spoken in years now pretending to grieve together. I stood at the front, next to my father's closed casket, staring at the golden nameplate. Jonathan Whitmore, beloved father, visionary businessman, and self-made mogul. The whispers around me weren't about grief. They were about money. Who would inherit the Whitmore empire? Everyone had their theories. My father built his company from nothing into an $80 million powerhouse. And as his only daughter, his most loyal child, I assumed I'd be the one to carry on his legacy. I worked under him for 6 years, learning the business inside and out. I had the degrees, the experience, and most of all, his trust. But when I met my brother's eyes from across the room, I felt something cold settle in my chest. Daniel was too calm, too smug, too prepared. I should have seen it then. But grief blinds you. It wasn't until later that day when I arrived at my father's headquarters to meet with the board that I realized what had been happening behind my back. I walked into the CEO's office, expecting to find my father's desk untouched. Maybe his old leather chair empty, still waiting for the next rightful owner. Instead, I found Daniel. Leaning back in the chair, feet propped up on the desk, sipping whiskey from our father's favorite crystal glass. My father had been buried less than 12 hours ago, and already my brother had made himself at home. I stopped in the doorway. What are you doing? Daniel smirked, swirling the whiskey. Getting comfortable. I clenched my jaw. This isn't your office. He laughed at that. Really laughed, full and deep, before setting the glass down and reaching into a folder on the desk. He pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it toward me. I hesitated before picking it up. The words, "Last Will and Testament" were printed in bold across the top. And under the section titled Inheritance and Succession, I felt my blood run cold. Everything. The company, the estate, the bank accounts. All of it had been left to Daniel. I swallowed hard. This is a mistake. Daniel grinned like a wolf. No, Melissa, it's not. I looked back down, scanning the words again, desperate for any loophole, any way this could be wrong. But it was my father's signature at the bottom. His words, his wishes. Daniel leaned forward, dropping his voice to a taunting whisper. I own everything now. He tilted his head, feigning sympathy. You? You have nothing. I should have cried, should have screamed, should have fallen apart. Instead, I started laughing, because a week ago, I had already made my move. Daniel's smirk faltered as my laughter echoed through the office. He expected me to break. He expected me to beg, to lash out, to collapse under the weight of betrayal. Instead, I wiped a tear from my eye, one of amusement, not sorrow, and took a seat across from him, crossing my legs like we were simply discussing business. Daniel frowned. What's so funny? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. Our father's desk, or at least the one Daniel thought was his now. Nothing, I said, smiling sweetly. It's just, you really think you won, don't you? He scoffed. Melissa, there's nothing to think about. It's right there in black and white. He tapped the will with his finger. Dad left everything to me. You're out. I picked up the document and turned it over, scanning the pages as if I was really considering his words. Then I set it down gently. I guess you didn't hear the news then. Daniel's cocky expression wavered just slightly. I let the silence stretch between us. I wanted him to sweat. News? He finally asked. I tilted my head. The board hasn't called you yet? He sat up straighter, suspicion creeping into his eyes. What are you talking about? I smiled. Now it was my turn to toy with him. You see, Daniel, while you were busy scheming and getting cozy in Dad's chair, I was making sure his true wishes were honored. I let that hang in the air for a moment before pulling out my phone. With a few swipes, I opened an email and turned the screen toward him. An official letter from Whitmore Enterprises' legal team. Daniel snatched the phone from my hand, his eyes scanning the email. His smirk vanished. This is impossible, he muttered. Oh, it's very possible. I leaned back, enjoying the look of confusion and anger twisting his features. The email detailed a company bylaw, one that Daniel had clearly overlooked. Our father had left him the company, yes. But the board had the final say on who could actually run it. And while Daniel might have inherited the title, he didn't automatically inherit control. The board had to approve the successor. And after reviewing his inexperience, financial recklessness, and complete lack of leadership skills, they had unanimously voted to reject his appointment as CEO. Daniel's hand clenched around the phone. This is a joke. I'm the rightful heir. I shrugged. You're the legal heir, sure. But Dad knew you couldn't run this place. I took a slow breath, letting my next words sink in. So, a week ago, he gave me power of attorney. Daniel's head snapped up. What? I reached into my bag and pulled out another document. This one was signed, sealed, and legally binding. I have full control over company operations, I said, placing it on the desk. And the board? They back me. Daniel's face turned red. Dad wouldn't. He would. And he did. I cut him off. Because he knew you'd do exactly this. I gestured around the office. He knew you'd get drunk on power, make impulsive decisions, and drive the company into the ground. Daniel stood up so fast his whiskey glass nearly toppled over. You think you're so smart, he spat. But I own the company. I stood too, facing him across the desk. And I run it. We locked eyes, the weight of the battle between us filling the room. I could see the gears turning in his head. He was trying to figure out a way around this. Some loophole. Some way to turn the tables. But there was none. Because I had spent years preparing for this moment. I had watched him. I had studied him. And I knew exactly how he operated. So while he had spent years waiting for Dad to die so he could take over, I had spent years making sure he never could. Daniel exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. This isn't over, Melissa. I smiled. Oh, I know. Because this was only the beginning. Daniel was seething. I could see it in the way his fists clenched at his sides, his breathing shallow, his nostrils flaring. He wasn't used to being outmaneuvered. For years, he'd been the golden boy, always skating by on charm and entitlement. But charm doesn't keep a company running. And entitlement doesn't override legal documents. I watched as he tried to process it all, how the company he thought he owned was slipping through his fingers. You still don't get it, do you? I said, sitting back down in the chair across from him, completely calm while he fumed. Dad might have left you the company, but he didn't leave you the power. That part is earned, Daniel. His face darkened. This is my company. I tilted my head. Then why is the board meeting with me tomorrow? Not you? His mouth opened, then snapped shut. There it was. The moment he realized he was truly screwed. The board didn't respect him. The employees didn't respect him. And without them, he was just a man with a title and an empire he didn't know how to run. He reached for the will again, flipping through it like he'd somehow missed a secret clause that would undo everything I'd just told him. I let him search, let him scramble. Because it didn't matter. I was prepared for this moment. He wasn't. Finally, he slammed the paper down. Dad always wanted me to take over. You must have manipulated him into signing that power of attorney. I laughed. Manipulated him? Dad knew exactly what he was doing. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. Do you really think he trusted you with an $80 million company when you can't even manage your personal credit card debt? His face went red. I smirked. Oh yes, I knew. Because while Daniel had been partying, blowing through cash, and making stupid investments, I had been watching, documenting, preparing. "Let's talk numbers, shall we?" I said, my voice sickeningly sweet. The house in the Hamptons, over-leveraged, the sports cars, all leased. And those business investments? I shook my head. More like luxury vacations disguised as networking events. Daniel's jaw tightened, but I wasn't done. See, the board loves results. They love discipline. They love strategy. I shrugged. And between the two of us, guess which one of us actually knows how to keep a company profitable? He didn't answer, because he already knew. I let the silence stretch before delivering the final blow. Oh, and one more thing. I reached into my bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. Dad wrote this for you before he passed. Daniel hesitated before snatching it from my hand. His fingers trembled slightly as he tore it open, unfolding the letter inside. I already knew what it said. I had read my own version just last week. Daniel, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And if I know you as well as I think I do, you're probably furious right now. But let me be clear, this was your doing, not mine. I watched you, son. For years, I watched you make reckless choices, squander opportunities, and expect rewards you didn't earn. I hoped you'd prove me wrong, that you'd show me you could be responsible. But you never did. So I did what needed to be done. The company I built is bigger than you, bigger than me. It needs a leader, not a spoiled boy with a famous last name. Melissa is that leader. You were given chances, Daniel. You wasted them. Now you'll have to learn the hard way. Dad. The room was silent. Daniel's hands gripped the letter so tightly I thought he might rip it in half. His breathing was uneven. His jaw clenched so hard I could practically hear his teeth grinding. I stood up, smoothing my blazer. Looks like Dad knew exactly what he was doing after all, I said, heading toward the door. Enjoy the whiskey, Daniel. It's the last thing in this office you actually own. I left without looking back, because I had already won, but I wasn't done yet. Not even close. I didn't have to look back to know Daniel was still sitting there, seething in my father's chair, a king without a kingdom. But I wasn't done yet. The next morning, I arrived at Whitmore Enterprises an hour before the scheduled board meeting. I walked past employees who had worked under my father for decades, men and women who knew my dedication, who had seen me put in the hours while Daniel spent his time spending. And yet, there was still tension in the air, because the company was in limbo. My father's will had named Daniel as the sole inheritor, but my power of attorney had given me temporary control over operations. That meant the board had to make a decision. Either they would officially install me as CEO, or they would leave it to Daniel and watch the company burn. I stepped into the executive conference room where the board members sat waiting. Men in crisp suits, old enough to have built their fortunes alongside my father. Some of them were loyal to me. Others? They were waiting to see who would come out on top. Daniel walked in 5 minutes late. His eyes were bloodshot, either from lack of sleep or too much whiskey. I didn't smile as he took the seat across from me, because this was war. The chairman, Mr. Langston, folded his hands. Let's get straight to the point. We have 2 possible successors, and we need to determine who is best suited to run this company. Daniel sat up straighter, fixing his tie. Gentlemen, I think the will makes it perfectly clear. My father wanted me to run Whitmore Enterprises. That was his final decision. Langston turned to me. Melissa? I met Daniel's gaze, then slid a stack of documents across the table. I'd like to present some evidence before the board makes their decision. Daniel scoffed. More legal tricks? I ignored him. These are financial records from the last 4 years. They show a pattern of reckless spending, personal debts, and failed investments, all tied to Daniel. I flipped to the next set of papers. These are internal emails from the finance department, warning about unauthorized company funds being redirected for personal use. Daniel's face turned red. You had no right, I continued, unfazed. And this I slid the final sheet forward. Is an investment report showing that just 1 week before our father's death, Daniel tried to liquidate over $10 million in company assets to cover personal debts. The room went silent. Because now it was no longer a question of leadership. It was a question of trust. Langston exhaled, tapping the papers. Is this accurate? I nodded. All verified. The board members exchanged glances. Daniel was gripping the table so hard his knuckles were white. You can't do this. I folded my hands calmly. I didn't do anything, Daniel. You did. And then I went in for the final strike. I pulled out one last document, one I had saved for this exact moment. A motion for an internal audit. Daniel's entire body went stiff. This is a formal request for a forensic investigation into all financial transactions made under your authorization, I said smoothly. If the board chooses to install you as CEO, this will be the first thing to happen under your leadership. Langston leaned forward, expression serious. Are you suggesting there has been embezzlement? I shrugged. I'm simply suggesting that Daniel's financial decisions have been questionable. But if he truly has nothing to hide, then I'm sure he wouldn't mind a full investigation. Daniel's face was pure panic, because he knew what they would find. And so did I. Langston looked at the rest of the board. Gentlemen, I think we've seen enough. Daniel slammed his fist on the table. This is a setup. She's trying to destroy me. Langston turned to me. Melissa, if we vote in your favor, what will your first act as CEO be? I didn't hesitate. Stability, I said. I will ensure that our investors, our employees, and our clients know that Whitmore Enterprises is in good hands. No reckless risks. No financial scandals. Langston nodded. And you, Daniel? Daniel was still fuming. His breath was uneven, his face pale. He looked around the room, searching for anyone to back him up. No one did. Because the truth was undeniable now. He wasn't fit to lead. Langston sighed. Let's vote. I didn't even have to count the hands. Because I already knew. It was unanimous. The board had just chosen me as the new CEO of Whitmore Enterprises. Daniel's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. His hands were shaking. You think this is over? He hissed. I stood too, adjusting my blazer. No, Daniel, I said smoothly. I think it just started. He stormed out of the room. I turned back to the board, shoulders squared, voice calm. Now, gentlemen, let's get to work. Because I had won the battle, but I was about to win the war. The moment I stepped out of the boardroom, I could feel the shift. The tension that had filled the air since my father's funeral was gone, replaced by certainty. Whitmore Enterprises was mine now. The executives I passed no longer hesitated before nodding in acknowledgement. Assistants who had once avoided eye contact now met my gaze with newfound respect. Because a leader had been chosen, and it wasn't Daniel. Speaking of my brother, he was nowhere to be found. I wasn't surprised. Losing the CEO title was only the first of his problems. There was still the matter of his financial misconduct. I stepped into my new office, my father's old office, feeling a strange mix of emotions. I had spent years sitting on the other side of this desk, learning from him. Now, I was in the seat he had always meant for me. But my victory wasn't complete yet. I pressed the intercom. Jessica, get me legal. A few minutes later, my father's longtime lawyer, Mr. Calloway, entered the office. He was old school. Pinstripe suit, silver hair, a man who had helped my father build his empire from the ground up. He took a seat across from me. I assume this is about Daniel. I nodded. I need to know exactly how much trouble he's in. Calloway opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick file. It's bad, he said bluntly. I skimmed the top page. Millions in company funds had been funneled through questionable investments, many of which led back to Daniel's personal accounts. It was theft, plain and simple. And now, with my new authority, I could decide how to handle it. Calloway folded his hands. The board will want to press charges. I exhaled slowly. And if I don't? He hesitated. Then you'll be seen as weak. And more importantly, if you let this slide, investors will assume Whitmore Enterprises tolerates financial misconduct. I nodded. That wasn't an option. Find out where he is, I said, closing the file. I'll deal with him myself. I found Daniel exactly where I expected, in our father's estate. Or rather, what used to be our father's estate. Now, it was legally his. But not for long. I parked in the driveway and walked through the grand front doors without knocking. Daniel was in the study, a glass of whiskey in hand, looking disheveled. His tie was loose, his shirt wrinkled. A man who had lost everything in the span of 24 hours. He didn't even look surprised to see me. Here to gloat? He muttered, swirling his drink. I shook my head. I'm here to talk about your options. His bitter laugh echoed through the room. Options? What options? You took everything, Melissa. I walked to the large oak desk, our father's desk, the one he had never let Daniel sit behind. I placed the file down in front of him. This is the evidence against you. Daniel's hand froze midair. I continued, voice even. If the board moves forward with charges, you're looking at embezzlement, fraud, and financial mismanagement. That's a prison sentence, Daniel. His face paled. He grabbed the file and flipped through the pages, panic creeping into his expression. This is exaggerated, he muttered. I crossed my arms. No, Daniel, this is reality. And right now you have one way out. His eyes flicked up to me. I let the silence stretch. Let him feel the weight of his own mistakes. Finally, I spoke. You're going to sign over your shares. He flinched. What? You heard me, I said, stepping closer. You still legally own the company, but without control. That means you have one valuable thing left, your stock, and you're going to sell it to me. His lips parted, but no words came out. If you do, I'll make sure the board doesn't press charges. I tilted my head. You'll walk away with a payout instead of a prison sentence. Daniel gritted his teeth. And if I don't? I leaned over the desk, staring him down. Then I let the law handle it. And trust me, Daniel, they won't be as kind as I am. The silence between us was heavy. For the first time in his life, Daniel had no leverage. No daddy to bail him out. No money to buy his way out. Nothing. Just me, offering him the only chance he had left. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for the pen on the desk. Then, without another word, he signed. The final goodbye. I took the papers, ensuring everything was legally binding. Daniel exhaled shakily. So, what now? I closed my bag and turned to leave. You disappear, Daniel. Take your money, start over, but you don't come back. He stared at me, defeated. Was this what you wanted? He asked softly. To destroy me? I paused in the doorway. No, Daniel, I said quietly. I wanted to save Dad's legacy. You destroyed yourself. And with that, I walked out. The company was mine. But more importantly, the Whitmore name was finally in the right hands. I didn't look back, because Daniel Whitmore was just another lesson learned, and I had an empire to run. 1 week after Daniel signed away his shares, I sat in the Whitmore Enterprises headquarters, looking out at the skyline my father had helped shape. It was over. The battle. The betrayal. The years of watching Daniel take everything for granted, believing he was untouchable. Now, he was gone. Disappeared with his payout. Stripped of his power, his legacy, his future in the company. And I? I had everything. The board had officially appointed me CEO. I now owned the company outright, after buying out Daniel's shares. And for the first time in years, Whitmore Enterprises was truly in the right hands. My first order of business? Undoing the damage Daniel had done. Sitting in my office, I met with my executive team, going over every department that had suffered under my brother's reckless financial decisions. I cut out the wasteful projects Daniel had started to line his own pockets. I restructured failing divisions, bringing in new leadership that had earned their place, not inherited it. I personally called our top investors, reassuring them that Whitmore Enterprises was stronger than ever. And just like that, confidence in the company returned. The stock price, which had dropped after my father's death and the uncertainty around the CEO transition, stabilized. Whitmore Enterprises was no longer a family inheritance. It was a legacy, a vision, and I was the one leading it forward, a ghost from the past. A month later, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something told me to answer. Melissa, came a tired, familiar voice. Daniel. I leaned back in my chair, pressing my fingers against my temple. What do you want? There was a long pause. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. I lost everything. I let out a humorless laugh. No, Daniel. You sold everything. Another silence. I thought... He hesitated. I thought if I had the company, it would fix everything. That it would prove I was worth something. I closed my eyes briefly. Dad never cared about titles, Daniel. He cared about the people who built them. I get that now, he muttered. But did he? Or was this just another moment of regret before he found another way to ruin himself? I don't expect you to forgive me, Daniel said quietly. I exhaled slowly. Good. He let out a weak laugh. You know, it's ironic. I used to think you were cold, that you were too obsessed with working hard and earning your place. I thought Dad would hand me the company just because I was his son. I shook my head, staring at the skyline. Daniel had never understood. I never wanted Dad to hand me the company, I said. I wanted to be worthy of it. Another silence. Then he sighed. Goodbye, Melissa. And just like that, he was gone. I stared at my phone for a long moment before setting it down. A week later, I stood in front of the entire company, addressing our employees for the first time as their official CEO. Whitmore Enterprises was built on hard work, sacrifice, and a vision that stretched beyond one man. My voice was steady, confident. And today, I promise you this. We will honor that vision. We will not let greed, entitlement, or misplaced power define our future. I let my gaze sweep across the crowd. My father built this company from the ground up, but it's not just his legacy anymore. It's ours. A wave of applause filled the room, and in that moment, I knew. I hadn't just won the battle against my brother. I had secured my father's dream. Whitmore Enterprises would never be a spoiled heir's playground. It would be a symbol of perseverance, of leadership, of integrity. And most importantly, it would be mine. Because Daniel had never understood one thing. Power isn't given. It's earned. And I had earned every bit of it. My name is Emma, and this is the story of how I lost everything, and then found something far more powerful. It all began the day after my husband Luke died. I stood on our front porch, numb from grief, with my overnight bag in one hand and a bouquet of wilted flowers from the hospital in the other. My eyes were puffy from crying, my hair a mess from sleeping in the hospital chair for 2 nights straight. Luke had fought for hours in the emergency room after a sudden heart attack. He was only 36. I reached into my bag for the house key. My fingers trembled as I slipped it into the lock. But it didn't turn. I frowned, tried again. Nothing. I took a deep breath, wiped my hand on my jeans, and tried the spare key. Still nothing. My heart started to pound, and not from grief this time. I knew this lock. I'd used it every day for 4 years. And now, it was like I didn't live here anymore. That's when I noticed something strange. Through the living room window, I saw boxes. cardboard boxes, a suitcase, a set of pink velvet cushions that weren't mine. I pressed my face to the glass to get a better look. And then I saw them. Karen, Luke's mother, was inside. So was Luke's sister, Stephanie. They were unpacking boxes like they were moving in, laughing, drinking tea from my favorite mugs. My head spun. I knocked. No answer. I knocked louder. Finally, the door opened, and there stood Karen, arms folded across her chest, lips curled into a satisfied smile. "Emma," she said, tilting her head. "Didn't expect you so soon." "What's going on?" I asked, stepping forward. "Why can't I open the door? Why are you here?" Karen didn't move. Instead, she leaned her shoulder against the doorframe, like this was all some minor inconvenience. "Because you don't live here anymore," she said plainly. "My son paid for this house, and now that he's gone, it belongs to his real family. You can leave." I blinked at her. I was sure I'd misheard. I'm his wife," I stammered. "We bought this house together. What are you talking about?" Karen scoffed. "Oh, please. You married him with no prenup, no job, no children. You contributed nothing. Luke paid the mortgage. Everything here is his. And now that he's gone, it reverts to us. You don't belong here anymore." Her voice was calm, almost cheerful. My blood ran cold. Stephanie appeared behind her, holding a stack of plates from our kitchen. "You left the door unlocked at the hospital," she said with a smirk. "So we just moved in. We thought you wouldn't mind." Something in me broke. I burst out laughing. The kind of laugh that comes from pure disbelief. Karen narrowed her eyes. "What's so funny?" I steadied myself, wiped a tear. I couldn't even tell anymore if it was from laughter or grief, and said, "You're unpacking your little knickknacks in a house you think belongs to you. But here's the thing, Karen." I leaned in, voice low and steady. "The house was mine." Karen's smirk faltered. 2 years ago, when Luke's credit was wrecked from those failed investments you pushed him into," I continued, "I refinanced the house in my name. Every mortgage payment since then came from my account. Luke was recovering. I took on a full-time job and held this place together." Karen's jaw clenched. She turned, clearly trying to think of a response. I kept going. "I didn't want to throw this in your face during the funeral. I didn't want to be that person. But now, you changed my locks. You broke into my home, and you're unpacking like you own the place." Stephanie put down the plates, her face turning red. "That's not true. He said he told us—" "What he told you doesn't matter," I snapped, "because legally this house is in my name. And the fact that you're here without permission, that makes you a trespasser." Karen's face was pale now. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I pulled out my phone and began dialing. "Should we see what the police think?" Karen snatched her handbag, calling for Stephanie. "We're not finished, Emma," she hissed. "This house should have stayed in the family. Luke was too soft on you." I stepped back, watching them storm out like children who'd been caught stealing candy. And there I stood, on the porch of my own home, key still useless in the lock. Heart shattered, but strangely empowered. They thought I was weak, that I had no fight left in me. But they had no idea who I had become while they were busy pretending I didn't matter. This was just the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. Even with the locks changed and the house finally silent again, my mind refused to rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Karen's face. Smug, cold, triumphant. Her words echoed like static. "You don't live here anymore." The audacity of it. The cruelty. Luke had only been gone one day, and his family had already tried to erase me. Not just from the house, from his life. Our life. I woke up before sunrise, made myself a coffee I didn't drink, and sat at the kitchen table staring at the empty chair where Luke used to sit. He always added cinnamon to his cup, I never liked it, but I still bought it just for him. The jar sat on the counter, untouched. As the first light crept into the room, I made a decision. I wasn't going to cry today. I wasn't going to let Karen take one more thing from me. That morning, I called the funeral home. "Hi, this is Emma Walker," I said. "I need to make some changes to the guest list for Luke's memorial service." There was a pause. "Certainly, ma'am. What changes would you like to make?" I exhaled slowly. "His mother and sister are no longer welcome." I hung up before I could second-guess myself. Later that day, I went into Luke's office, a small room at the back of the house with messy stacks of receipts, books, and unopened mail. I hadn't been in here since the hospital. Everything smelled like him. Faint cologne, printer ink, and that weird citrus candle he insisted helped him focus. I needed to find paperwork. Anything that could help me understand why Karen thought she had a claim on this house. She had spoken so confidently, like she knew something I didn't. And then I saw it. A small file folder on the desk, labeled in Luke's handwriting. "Prenup? Do not discard." I stared at it, confused. Luke and I never signed a prenup. At least I didn't think we had. My hands trembled as I opened the folder. Inside were several pages, printed on official letterhead, dated just a week before our wedding 3 years ago. My name. Luke's name. Legal terms I didn't fully understand. And one line, highlighted in yellow. "In the event of my death, all jointly owned assets, including property, shall be transferred fully to my spouse, Emma Walker, unless otherwise stated in a last will and testament." I blinked. This wasn't a prenup. It was a postnup, a financial agreement Luke must have drafted after our marriage. Something he never told me about. And tucked behind it was a handwritten note. "In case Karen ever tries anything, you know how she is. Keep this." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding and laughed, softly, bitterly. Of course he knew. Of course he'd prepared. Luke had been the peacekeeper between us, always telling me to give her grace, that she meant well, that she's just scared of losing control. But deep down, even he knew she'd try something like this. I stood up and walked back to the front door. For the first time since he died, I felt something I hadn't felt in days. Power. The next afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't surprised to see Karen standing there, dressed in black, sunglasses on even though it was cloudy. Beside her was a man in a gray suit holding a clipboard. "Emma," she said flatly, "this is Mr. Langley, my family attorney. We're here to discuss next steps for the house." I didn't open the door. "Next steps?" I asked, my voice calm. Karen nodded as if this were a meeting between polite acquaintances. "Luke left no will, which means his estate is up for legal division. As his next of kin, we have a right to claim what belongs to him, and to us." I tilted my head. "You mean me? His wife? His legal spouse?" Karen's mouth twitched. I took a slow breath. "Actually, I'm so glad you came. Saves me a trip." I stepped away from the door and came back holding the postnup in one hand and the deed in the other. "Do you want to read the part where it says I inherit everything?" I asked, voice still calm. "Or should I call my lawyer and let her explain it to you in court?" Karen's attorney reached out for the documents, but I pulled them back. "You can have your copy when you get one through official channels," I said, then locked the screen door. "And until then, stay off my porch." Karen's face cracked, just slightly, but it was enough. She knew. She lost. They turned and walked back to the car without another word. And for the first time since Luke died, I smiled. But what I didn't know was that Karen wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The days after that confrontation with Karen were quiet. Unsettlingly so. No more unexpected visitors. No letters. No late-night calls. Part of me hoped, foolishly, that she had finally accepted the truth. That she'd crawled back to her own miserable life and let me mourn in peace. But another part of me knew better. Karen didn't back down. She regrouped, Still, I tried to reclaim some sense of normalcy. I spent most of my time sorting through Luke's things, packing up some of his clothes, organizing the paperwork in his office. Each drawer I opened felt like pulling back a layer of grief. One morning, I found his old camera bag buried in the back of our closet. Inside were dozens of memory cards, some of them from our honeymoon, others from random road trips or lazy afternoons in the backyard. I spent the whole day looking through them, smiling through tears. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine, lit one of Luke's favorite candles, and sat on the porch just as the sun dipped below the trees. For a moment, I felt something like peace. And then I saw the envelope sticking out of the mailbox. No stamp. No address. I looked around. The street was empty. I opened it carefully. To whom it may concern, we are writing to inform you that a formal petition has been filed with the County Probate Court by Karen Blake, mother of the late Luke Walker, challenging the legitimacy of the property transfer between Mr. and Mrs. Walker. The petitioner alleges that undue influence, mental distress, and coercion may have played a role in the post-nuptial agreement. A hearing has been scheduled. I dropped the letter. She was going to court. Despite the deed. Despite the signed agreement. Despite Luke's note. And the worst part? She was accusing me of manipulating him. I called my lawyer, Angela, immediately. Her voice was calm, as always. Too calm. I had a feeling she'd pull something like this, Angela said. It's all noise, Emma. If we have the deed, the contract, and proof of his mental competence at the time, we'll win. She's accusing me of coercion, I said, my voice shaking. Angela paused. I know. And I know it feels personal, because it is personal. But she's not interested in the truth. She wants control. I want to fight, I whispered. I want to destroy her. Angela's tone shifted. Good, but we do it smart. You keep quiet. You don't reach out. Let me handle the court. I hung up and sat in the dark for a long time, clutching that letter like it might bite. 2 days later, I got another surprise. This one didn't come in an envelope. It came in the form of a text message from James, Luke's old business partner. Hey, I didn't want to get in the middle of anything, but Karen called me. She said you might have pressured Luke to transfer the house. I know that's not true, but she's asking for emails, medical records, anything to prove he was mentally unfit. I stared at the screen, stunned. I hadn't spoken to James in over a year. Not since Luke stepped away from the company after his heart issues started. They had parted on neutral terms, but now Karen was clearly dragging everyone into this, digging for anything she could twist. Did you tell her anything? I replied. A few dots appeared. Then, no. But, Emma, she mentioned something about Luke's last investor meeting. Said he was confused, forgetful. She's building a case. That's when the knot in my chest turned to dread. Because I knew what Karen was talking about. There was one morning, just months before Luke died, when he'd come home from a client meeting looking pale and shaken. He couldn't remember where he'd parked. He forgot the name of the client he'd just spoken to. He blamed it on stress. Said he hadn't been sleeping well. But what if it had been more than that? What if Karen had found out? What if she had medical records? I stood frozen in the middle of the kitchen, holding my phone, heart pounding. If she could convince the court that Luke wasn't in his right mind, even if it was just circumstantial, she might be able to unravel everything. And then it hit me like a punch to the stomach. Luke had seen a neurologist. He hadn't wanted me to come with him. Said it was probably nothing. But what if that appointment held the key to everything? I rushed to his office and yanked open every drawer. Files, folders, envelopes. I tore through it all until I found it. An unopened letter from St. Michael's Neurology. I ripped it open. Dear Mr. Walker, following your recent cognitive assessment, we are pleased to inform you that your results fall within the normal range. No signs of early cognitive decline were detected. I let out a breath that nearly became a sob. He had been okay. And now, I had proof. I clutched the letter to my chest like a lifeline, because Karen had just declared war, and I was finally ready to fight back. The morning of the hearing arrived gray and quiet, like the sky itself was holding its breath. I stood in front of the courthouse in a black dress and flats, clutching my bag as if it could protect me. Inside was everything I needed: the deed, the post-nup, Luke's neurology letter, and just enough rage to keep me standing upright. Angela met me on the steps. "Ready?" she asked gently. I nodded. "She's going to lie, isn't she?" Angela gave me a tight smile. "Oh, absolutely. But lies don't last long in court." We walked inside. Karen was already there, sitting in the front row with her attorney, Mr. Langley, and her face was pure theater, dressed in grief, draped in black lace, with a tissue clutched dramatically in her hand. Stephanie sat beside her, eyes cast downward like a dutiful daughter in mourning. Neither of them looked at me, but that didn't matter. I wasn't here for them. I was here for Luke, for the life we built together, and the future she was trying to rip away from me piece by piece. The hearing was brief. Angela presented the deed, the notarized post-nup, and the medical letter from Luke's neurologist. When Mr. Langley tried to argue that Luke had been under duress, Angela asked one simple question. "Do you have any documentation that supports that claim?" He didn't. By the end of the session, even the judge seemed irritated. "I see no grounds to dispute the legality of the property transfer," he said firmly. "This house legally belongs to Mrs. Emma Walker. Case dismissed." And just like that, it was over. Or so I thought. As I stepped outside, Karen followed me out. "You may have won the house," she hissed, the mask of grief crumbling off her face. "But you can't erase me. I'm his mother." "I didn't erase you," I said without turning around. "You did that to yourself." She stopped walking. "What's that supposed to mean?" I turned slowly. "Luke's funeral is tomorrow. You're not invited." Her face twisted. "You can't keep me from my own son's funeral." I held her gaze. "I already did. I called the funeral home the morning after you changed my locks. Your name is off the guest list. If you show up, they'll escort you out." "You vindictive little—" "No," I interrupted, my voice low and calm. "You don't get to call me anything. Not after what you did. You tried to steal my home. You spread lies about me in court. And worst of all, you tried to take his death and turn it into a power play." She opened her mouth, but I didn't let her speak. "Luke wouldn't want you there," I added, "and you know it." I turned and walked away before she could respond. But that night, I didn't sleep. Not out of guilt, but fear. Because Karen didn't lose gracefully. She didn't lose quietly. The morning of the funeral came like a tidal wave, sudden and cold. I woke early, dressed in the black dress I had worn at Luke's court hearing, and went to the guest list one more time to confirm. Karen and Stephanie were not on it. The service was scheduled for noon. By 10, people had already begun arriving at the chapel. Friends, colleagues, a few distant relatives I hadn't seen in years. They came with soft smiles and kind words, placing hands on my shoulder, telling me how much Luke had meant to them. "He always talked about you," one woman said, pressing a hand to her chest. "Always said you were the best thing that ever happened to him." I nodded, swallowing hard. "Thank you." By 11:45, every seat in the chapel was full. Except for the two in the very back. I noticed them immediately. Karen and Stephanie. They had come anyway. They weren't on the guest list. They weren't supposed to be allowed through the doors. But there they were, dressed like mourning royalty, expressions locked in fake composure. I stood frozen at the front of the chapel, my heart thudding in my chest. Angela, who had come as a friend, touched my arm. "Do you want me to handle it?" I shook my head. "Number, I'll do it." I walked down the aisle as the room quieted and all eyes followed me. Karen looked up as I approached, her jaw tight. "You're not supposed to be here," I whispered. Karen folded her arms. I'm not leaving. Then I will. Her eyes flickered in surprise. I'll walk out right now and I'll take the minister with me. We'll do the funeral somewhere else. A park, the backyard. I don't care. But I will not let you sit here and pretend to be a grieving mother when all you care about is what you didn't get. Karen stood up abruptly, but before she could speak, Stephanie reached for her arm. Mom, she whispered. Let's go. Karen stared at her, stunned. Stephanie avoided her gaze and stood up, her eyes on the floor. After a long pause, Karen followed, seething in silence as they walked out of the chapel. The door clicked shut behind them, and I finally exhaled. The minister began to speak, and I said goodbye to the man I loved, surrounded by people who actually knew what love was. The day after the funeral, the house was still. Not peaceful, just eerily quiet, like the walls were waiting for something to happen. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in black, staring at the empty spot next to me where Luke used to sleep. The scent of him still lingered faintly on the pillow. It felt like he might walk in any minute with coffee in hand, humming that off-key song he always made up when he thought I wasn't listening. But he wouldn't. He was really gone. And in the absence of his presence, all that remained was his legacy, and the mess his mother had tried to create in the shadows. The court had ruled in my favor. Karen had been kicked out of the funeral. Stephanie hadn't even looked me in the eye, but I knew better than to assume it was over. People like Karen didn't just leave. They waited, and then they circled back. So when I saw her car parked across the street that morning, engine off, windows cracked just enough to smoke a cigarette, I wasn't surprised. I simply stepped onto the porch with my coffee in hand and stared her down until she flicked her cigarette out the window and drove away. She never had the courage to face me directly again. Over the next few weeks, I focused on cleaning out Luke's office, room by room, item by item. Each drawer I opened brought a new wave of memories. His watch, a box of old business cards, a photo of the two of us at the lake before everything got complicated. But it wasn't just grief I felt anymore. It was determination. Karen had tried to strip me of everything, my home, my reputation, even my right to mourn the man I loved. She thought I'd fall apart. She thought I'd crawl away and disappear. Instead, I did something else. I started digging. In the backyard, where Luke had always dreamed of building a garden. He talked about it often, usually while flipping through seed catalogs or pointing at YouTube videos about compost. It had been his dream, and I had ignored it. Always too busy, always saying, maybe next season. But now the garden was going to grow, and it was going to grow in his name. Every morning before work, I pulled weeds, turned soil, and planted rows of vegetables and wildflowers. I worked in silence, letting the earth calm me. I watched as the first signs of life began to peek through. Green shoots, buds, the promise of something beautiful. It became my sanctuary, my therapy. And one day, while I was watering the flower bed, I saw an envelope tucked under the welcome mat by the door. No return address. I picked it up, already knowing who it was from. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just 6 typed words in large, bold font. This house will always be mine. I read it once, then laughed. Not bitterly, but lightly, almost with relief. Karen had nothing left. No legal ground, no power, just words. She couldn't come near me. The restraining order Angela helped me file had seen to that, but she still needed to make herself known, like a ghost tapping on glass, hoping to remind me she still existed. But I wasn't scared of ghosts anymore. I walked calmly into the house, took the letter, and used it as mulch in the garden bed. Pressed it deep into the soil where the marigolds were just beginning to bloom. Luke would have appreciated the symbolism. Months passed. The house slowly stopped feeling haunted. The walls breathed again. The hallway no longer echoed with grief, but with the quiet hum of healing. I painted the guest room. I changed the curtains. I planted herbs in the kitchen window like I always said I would. I was no longer surviving. I was reclaiming. One evening in early spring, I stood in the garden, the sky glowing pink above me, and realized I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for her. Not for pain. I was living again with Luke always in my thoughts, and that was the greatest revenge of all.